Great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Rick Leach. I am the Vice President of Content Operations at crowdcontent.com, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar. I know some of you are expecting to see my colleague Carlos as the host for today's session, but last minute change. I apologize for any disappointment, and I hope that I am consolation prize enough. But the good news is that our guest today is going to be giving all of the valuable information. So you're not missing out on anything there. A couple quick housekeeping things. Please feel free to use the Q&A for any questions, and I think we'll likely get to those once Bernard is done with his presentation. And feel free to be active in chat. I'll go ahead and keep an eye on those things to make sure that we address them at the right time. So today we are going to talk about information gain, and I'm really excited and honored to introduce Bernard Wang as our expert today. Bernard is the founder of ClearScope, a company that has helped thousands of businesses create audience-first content for their sites, audience-first content that ranks well for their sites. Bernard, it is a pleasure to have you here, and we're really excited to hear about information gain, a term that has become more and more popular over the last year, particularly with what AI has done in this industry. Information gain is something we talk about often at Crowd Content, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to share with us today. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Bernard.
Thank you so much for that amazing intro, Rick. I got a lot to cover, so I figure let's just jump right in, talk about information gain. I think that the concept has become a lot more popular in today's day and world of approaching SEO content because of the rise of commodity content caused by large language models. You know these as ChatGPT, Gemini, all of that. You'll see here, to kick us off, I figured I would show that recent algorithm updates have been extraordinarily volatile. We are seeing Google search see its biggest existential risk or threat that I think it's ever seen. Before this, I think ideas like voice search or, mobile and all of these things were possibilities to really disrupt Google. But I think with the advent of chatbots like Gemini, well, Gemini is Google owned, but like ChatGPT, that Google is now scrambling to figure out, okay, how is this going to affect our business? How is this going to affect, how people search for information on the internet? So to kick us off, right, search was built on a content model and, of course, an authority model. But for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to focus more on the content side of what Google is looking for, right? At its core, search is about understanding language. And that is the underpinning of what information gain alludes to, right? It's about your ability to surface and bring up information that's actually additive to the topic that people are searching for. So Google obviously does lots of advanced natural language processing, and you can see that through, Google Cloud Natural Language. They also have all kinds of different machine learning technologies at play. At the end of all of this, what Google does is they construct a knowledge graph that is, in simple terms, a database of relational entities or concepts. So in this particular slide, what this looks at is a simplified view of how the knowledge graph works. Essentially, at its core, we have search engine optimization. And then, as we branch out from SEO, we get things like quality content, technical SEO, and these days, artificial intelligence. And what Google wants to know is whether or not your content is actually doing a good job covering the subject matter as denoted by, the knowledge graph. We also certainly have more evidence that, the knowledge graph is a very important aspect of what Google cares about when we inspect and take a closer look at, the Google Leaks, API leaks documents, right? Just to search for knowledge graph, which doesn't even take the acronym KG, just shows that, right, there's a bajillion different models that Google is looking for and houses as knowledge graph concepts within how they're evaluating their content that they're surfacing. So before we talk about information gain, I think it's important to think through how Google's algorithm is actually working. So let's take a segue into SERP engagement. If you've been following Google search, you will have noticed that there was an antitrust case that the Department of Justice came after Google for search. And within the case documents, what was revealed does indeed utilize a lot of user interaction to inform whether or not the content that's being served to searchers is actually relevant and meeting user needs. In these same documents, what we saw is that Google doesn't actually know what's happening. They fake it, right? They just use what users are doing to inform or reinforce whether or not the search engine results pages are actually good and helpful. So this is actually why we see, search engine results pages in flux. At the end of the day, what Google's algorithm is theoretically trying to accomplish is to produce a search engine results page that has the highest likelihood of minimizing subsequent actions, or put more simply, concluding the searcher journey. What we see then is that if Google were to have a search engine results page for Kiwi and all of the results would be, about the fruit, that there would be dissatisfaction that users have, which would then result in the user having to go back to Google search and reperform another search for the New Zealand flightless bird or the benefits of eating the fruit. So search engine results pages, again, they evolve based off of user engagement. And the idea is that the most engaging content, or the content that has the highest likelihood of concluding a search, is then going to rise to the top. Okay, now that we have this user engagement layer settled, now we can talk about information gain. This is the patent that Google filed around information gain. And simply put, what Google is saying is that information gain is the potential for another document to add subsequent or relevant information to a topic after, a user has seen the first document. So, right, if we were to go back to the knowledge graph, I think a simpler way of thinking about it is that information gain are simply entities on the fringe of Google's knowledge graph for the topic, right? If we have an ultimate guide on how to approach search engine optimization, and we did not talk about artificial intelligence, large language models, ChatGPT, all of that good stuff, well, then you can imagine that Google would look at a document, a subsequent document that does talk about artificial intelligence language models, and say that that document has a high information gain score for the given topic of search engine optimization. So essentially, information gain is referring to the fact that topics are likely to evolve over time, right? Obviously, there's an asterisk by that. That is like, well, if it's a historical record, a fact, those topics aren't going to change because, that's not going to happen unless somebody were to rewrite history. But yes, so topics are going to in constant flux. And information gain refers to the possibility of directions that a topic could evolve into. So why information gain matters to Google is very simple. Google always wants to be serving users the most relevant and up-to-date information for any given topic. So as a topic is evolving in all kinds of different directions, Google needs to find the right answer to be serving the searcher. In this example, we could say that SEO is evolving towards both artificial intelligence and this concept of topical authority. How it manifests in the Google search, this is again back to the patent, is that Google is, again, constantly trying to surface new documents that a user is going to be searching for given a topic and trying to see whether or not that document is doing a good job meeting searcher needs. So back to the user engagement signal idea, right? I have a screenshot of a Google Search Console where the orange line is average position and the blue line is clicks. What you can imagine why you see, your content piece wobble around in the user in the average position is because Google is constantly testing different documents to see whether or not those are actually more helpful to the user. So, right back to that user engagement, what we see, and this is just an example, but if Google tried a piece of content that had a high information gain score, pointing in topical authority as position 1, and the overall user engagement was 60%, that's going to be worse than, right, if Google were to try an information gain document around SEO that's pointing to artificial intelligence as rank number 1, and user engagement there is 80%. So user engagement then is ultimately what reinforces the learning of where a topic is evolving, because Google is saying, okay, there's an infinite world of possibilities that any given topic could evolve in any given direction. We don't know, but what we do know is that, right, artificial intelligence and search engine optimization are increasingly becoming related in the knowledge graph. And when we surface, this type of content up to our users, we're finding that, result number 1, which talks about artificial intelligence, is doing a better job just concluding search journeys. So that must actually be good. And so user engagement and information gain then inform, right, what search engine results pages get presented to users. I think this is probably one of the most interesting points, is that Google is scrambling for unique original content. This is why you see Google strike a deal with Reddit, right? $60 million, because Google needs information gain to feed its artificial intelligence and large language models. And a lot of the content that, SEO content practitioners are producing are simply not quite adding to the topic that Google wants. So Google then gets a direct feed to Reddit data, and it uses this, in my opinion, this is purely theoretical. I think a lot of, recent Google updates are so dramatic and so drastic that it's kind of like okay, let's take this 1 month at a time and realize that maybe next month, the algorithm could be completely different. Anyways, I believe that what Google is doing with forums and user-generated content is that it's looking at discussions as one of the fastest ways to understand topical evolution, or we could call it topical drift, right? If there is an active community, also known as Reddit, that is talking about all kinds of different things surrounding a given topic, that's going to be the best way for Google to infer or build credibility and confidence that topics are evolving in certain directions. You can imagine then, in a very, again, simplistic manner, Google is taking the discussions that are happening, running it through natural language processing to understand the entities that a piece of content is contributing, and then graphing it in word vector space to then further understand where information gain scores are likely to be assigned given what it's understanding from UGC. Also, we've started to see these show up in the search engine results pages themselves, but UGC has trust signals built in. These as upvotes, like comments, all of these things. So what Google can then do is, again, take the entities that are being produced by discussions and reinforce that learning through upvotes and comments to say that this is, a high trust confidence piece of content. And, I didn't take a screenshot of the Google Leaks API docs, but, they're currently weighting UGC multiplied by 1,000, something like that. And Google is literally just saying, okay, we have a content quality issue. People are not finding the content that, we're surfacing to be engaging and original. So let's just rely on this for now. And let's then have a propaganda campaign designed to produce fear, uncertainty, and doubt in SEO content creators to say, hey, your content needs to be EEAT. You've probably heard that: experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, but that's still purely aspirational, right? Google is saying, this is what we want your content to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And a lot of the time, Google propaganda is many years ahead of Google execution, and there were no mentions of EEAT, at least within the leaked Google API docs. Other interesting things that we're seeing, there's this concept of a hidden gems update that happened a couple years ago. Kevin here says that, hidden gems content show good user engagement, but lives on a domain that lacks authority or topical relevance. So I think it's an interesting observation here that hidden is likely low domain authority and gem is high user engagement signal, right? Again, I think that Google is realizing that a bunch of the high authority sites are simply halo affected into ranking for top queries, because you see this most egregiously through Forbes and tech, like Huffington Post and that kind of stuff, right? It's like, well, Forbes isn't really an authority on personal finance or printers or whatever, but because they're Forbes, they get the benefit of the doubt. And Google is saying, okay, well, we actually need to be focusing on lower domain authority sites that produce great content. But anyways, it's just kind of a mess. You also see here they had something called the perspectives filter, and this, I think, is actually what graduated into just being Google being like, okay, let's just weight user-generated content by 1,000. I think this perspectives filter has been deprecated since its launch, but the whole idea was, again, to surface up original, unique, and interesting content that Google needs to be doing if it's going to be staying relevant in today's search. Which brings us to this concept of originality. I'll put that in quotation marks because originality is not actually what you think it means. It's actually very nuanced. So you can see here, Google says, okay, look, we're going to be reducing unoriginal content by 40%, which you see highlighted down below. The interesting observation about this is that 40% is a very quantifiable number, right? If Google knows what 40% looks like, then we could assume that Google knows what 100% looks like. So what is unoriginal content? Let's talk about that. So SERPs vary in consensus depending on the topic that you're researching. in this theoretical example, right? If we have 3 results on the front page that say this is the answer, and we agree that this is the answer, and we also agree, and when Google serves that to users and they find that users like what they're seeing with user engagement signal, then we could assume that that as a consensus is very tightly correlated. Looking at it in a different way, you could think about SERP consensus varying by query type and classes of searches, right? So when a new topic first enters the ecosystem, Google doesn't know what to do with it, what to think about it. So they're going to try a bunch of different pieces of content, depending on the domain and topical authority of the website that's producing the content. However, right, as a topic matures, or as new content comes out that matches specific query types, what you're going to find is that consensus is going to vary by the class of query and the user engagement signal that's designed to reinforce that particular topic or SERP. So put in a knowledge graph centric way, this is what it looks like, right? At 0%, we have a core topic and we have all these like scattered entities that the topic could correlate with and have a relationship with. As right consensus builds, what you start to see is that the topic starts to form a relationship with different entities or subtopics until we get to the final form where a topic is just always closely related to related entities. So what we've seen, the implementation of this is just a featured snippet, right? A featured snippet is Google saying, I have a high confidence answer that I know to be correct because pretty much if there's a tight correlation between this topic being mentioned and this entity or answer being mentioned, and when we serve this, we find that users find what they need, right? So a feature snippet is validated or reinforced with user engagement signal because when they show it, literally the user doesn't do anything else on the SERP, right? Like they don't click on a result, they don't perform an additional search. And in that world, Google is saying, well, that's a perfectly great answer for Google searchers. Obviously, for SEO content creators like ourselves, we get annoyed and frustrated that Google is essentially plagiarizing or copying our content, serving it to users, and we're getting pretty much no traffic and very little visibility to reward ourselves. And hence, that is a whole other set of problems that Google has versus publishers. But I'll save that for another day. Large language models, right? That's one of the key innovations that have happened in 2020. And it goes back a little bit like GPT-2 and all of that. What you're seeing here is a inside look at how large language models work. Put simply, they're like sophisticated autocompletes that look at the probability that certain words should follow other words, certain sentences should follow other sentences, and certain paragraphs should follow other paragraphs. You can see here that if we took a look at, the first president of United and looked at states, that this model is saying that, okay, it's probably an 80% chance that you want states. If you had other options, there would be nations, Arab kingdom, and airlines, and all of those totally make sense. But yeah, we probably want states. So essentially, right, they're looking at probabilities of certain things. Also interesting is that if you've been dabbling with artificial intelligence, what you'll know is that there's this idea of temperature. Temperature basically gives the language model more of a leash, like a longer leash, to say, okay, if we're saying that the temperature could be really hot, then essentially we're giving the language model the permission to go and look at lower probability outcomes and use them within their output, right? So when you're dialing in temperature, on a language model, you're essentially giving the language model more permission to go with lower probability outcomes, which again produces vastly different outputs than if we were to stick to, right, the consensus that everybody has. All right, so that's to say that large language models have been surprisingly good because they've been able to replicate like human language, right? If there's been a lot of confidence that's established within certain topics or subtopics, then what the language model shines at is regurgitating with a high degree of accuracy or probability that that is the correct output. But, where LLMs get into trouble, you call these hallucinations, inaccuracies, biases, is when, the training or embedding data is still fairly scant or, the topics is fairly new. And so if that's all still pretty unsure, yeah, the language models are not going to go there. And a lot of data science and machine learning is going to basically preventing inaccuracies and hallucinations, which is then kind of pushing the language model closer to this style of content. So what we see is that recent updates are penalizing consensus topics. Helpful Content Update version 1, you can see here, Lily Ray comes out and says, hey, I don't know why these types of websites are getting penalized the most, but lyric websites, grammar websites, celebrity net worth websites, coding websites, the initial assumptions were all around affiliate links, ads, worse user experience, but I believe that it's because of consensus, right? So recent updates penalize consensus. In the Google algorithm leak API docs, there is this notion of baby panda. Baby panda, you go way back in, search engine optimization world, panda was designed to penalize websites that had duplicative or plagiarized content. And that was the whole deal, like this is like 14 years ago when Panda was first released. So people have been making the assertion or the hypothesis that helpful content update is actually what internally Google has been calling baby panda. And baby panda, right? If you thought about panda as, okay, we're going to penalize any piece of content that looks the same, right? What baby panda, I think, is doing is that it's penalizing any piece of content that doesn't contribute to the knowledge graph or doesn't have an information gain score that's positive for the topic, right? This is back to the patent now. What this document, information helpful, does this even read correctly? Was this document redundant? Anyways, right, if we think about it then as more of an entity and information gain perspective, we could see that lyric website 1, 2, and 3, right, if they're all talking about lyrics for a particular song, yeah, they're duplicative, but more importantly, they're not contributing any new entities or information gain to the topic. So you see generic lyric websites like Lyrics Roll, rise up and then get crushed by helpful content update. You see genius.com stay afloat because, right, they focus on the user-generated content through what they call genius annotations, and their traffic stays stable. So what we're starting to see then with AI overviews, well, is a lot of fluctuation in terms of implementation, but in my opinion, AI overviews are designed to answer consensus queries, right? You have this particular thing, and what it's designed to do, there has been, a scale up, a scale down, but it's really to then say, okay, what are the classes of queries that are high consensus, like the what, how to, top best, and the featured snippets, and let's just go ahead and answer those quickly. What then this leads us to believe is that reducing unoriginal answers by 40% is reducing the amount of surface area that Google is placing on content that is high consensus, right? The more consensus it is, basically Google could call that redundant or unoriginal, right? Because it's not adding anything new to the topic. So, right, this little robot kind of cuts off at the 60% mark. And what I think is happening, right, is that Google is saying, well, we don't care about this set of content anymore because it's redundant. It's literally, all the definition stuff all more or less says the same thing. So let's just reduce that, right? Get rid of it. If it's not adding anything new from an information gain perspective, then it shouldn't need to exist. So what we're seeing then is, I think, we have two algorithms now at play. You have what's optimizing for AI overviews, and you have what's optimizing for SERPs. I think the data that backs this up is that people have been doing studies on AI overviews, and what they're realizing is that something could have been position 55 or 60, yet that piece of content is being surfaced as the AI overview. And right, that has a strange non-correlation to what we would have expected the SERPs to have done. So Mike King, Garrett Sussman from iPullRank, they've talked a lot about this. They call it, passage rankings or retrieval augmented generation. But right, Google is saying, look, this right here, right, this top section, right, that's a different algorithm, right? That's more of a consensus-driven algorithm where what we care about is the inclusion of entities that are very rich. And the more entities that you can include within your piece of content that talks about this, the better it's probably going to be. So let's do that. But right, if we're going to replace our above the fold experience with this set of content, what do we need below that to really, still keep users engaged and happy with the search result? And that's what they've been calling original and engaging content. So let's talk about creating original and engaging content. On the surface, again, right, this sounds very aspirational, but from a technical perspective, it's very nuanced. So when we say create original content, what I believe Google cares about is content requiring sufficient information gain that's adding to the topic to qualify. Original isn't just, let's just, talk about anything that we care about. It needs to add to the topic in a way that Google respects that piece of content to be contributing. What you can also think about is that, right, if Google's algorithm is using user engagement signal to understand whether or not SERPs are good or bad for users, then the search engine results page that we're getting is designed to please or placate the 70% of users who are engaging with the topic. So the nuance to all of this is that I might be, very advanced in my SEO practicing, and I might see a convergence with, say, SEO and blockchain, like far in the future, right? Where I'm like, okay, well, how do we know that Bernard actually wrote this or that like Rick actually said that? We don't know, right? There's all this like fake news, fake whatever. And it's like, oh, but if there was a blockchain that everybody could read from and write into that said, yes, Bernard did indeed say this, on April 22nd, 2022, something like that, then that would be fantastic. But the problem is that, yes, that might be original, forward-thinking content, but it's too far removed from what the 70% of people who are searching for this topic are likely thinking about or caring about. So it requires sufficient information gain in the way that Google wants to see it, not in your own framework of understanding the topic. Right? That's why ClearScope exists. It's to help you optimize your content for related entities with the current and correct implementation of information gain, right? Because we can't be too far But we also can't be, non-additive to the topic, right? If we just say everything that everybody already knows, well, we're not going to rank. But if we say things that people don't know, but it's too far away, well, we're also not going to rank. That's what I'm talking about here, is that information gained without relevancy won't work because it's too far away. I can't just be talking about SEO and blockchain if those entities have not been correlated in Google's algorithm. Yes, I'll have more of a shot to rank, right? If Google believes that ClearScope or Bernard is an authority on this particular topic, but right, I have a lot of convincing to do. Chances are, you probably work for smaller websites and you're just not going to have that ability to convince Google that, SEO should be talked about with certain things. You can kind of see here, Google's back to the API docs, right? Google says there's this concept which I find really interesting called a site focus score and a site radius. And if you look at it, it's the measure of how far page embeddings deviate from the site embedding. And then the site focus score is a number denoting how much a site is focused on one topic. So you can imagine, right, what Google knows about your website. And this is basically, I think, the underpinning of topical authority is that, NerdWallet, as an example, is an authority on personal finance, credit cards, retirement, all these different things, right? And so they have all of these different topics like personal finance, credit cards, and they have a site focus score for each one. So NerdWallet probably scores, 1 out of 0 to 1 for each one of those different things. However, right, if NerdWallet were to start to talk about weight loss pills or things outside of personal finance, then overall the site focus score for weight loss is going to be, probably like 0.1 or 0.2. And so the site radius isn't really going to cover that particular topic. And then Google's going to look less favorably upon, NerdWallet's content should they start producing things around health-related concepts. So that brings us to this, AI threat. And I think that a lot of the traditional ways that we as SEOs have been practicing content creation is at risk, right? We target keywords, and target keywords are typically very high consensus, right? If we're talking about the benefits of content marketing or SEO, we kind of all agree that it's, creating more leads or ROI for your site, and it's like, an investment, and it continues to produce and all of these things. And there's not much more that we can be adding to the topic. And in these cases, what Google has been doing is that, okay, well, we're just going to replace that with a featured snippet or an AI overview. We also, are all guilty of doing something like this, right? Where when we produce content, we abide by the best practices that we've been doing for so long, where we say, okay, let's talk about the top bone broth benefits, and then you have this above the fold that like answers the what is bone broth, and all of this is kind of a big problem, right? People are becoming dissatisfied with this type of experience. Google is recognizing that, yeah, overall it's unoriginal, it's redundant. Why should we be serving this when, AI overviews or featured snippets can be answering the top benefits? We need a different model and a different system. And that's kind of what you see playing out, at least with Google propaganda for now, right? If we talk about bone broth, instead of always just saying, okay, top benefits of bone broth, okay, that answers the why, that's at risk for AI overviews and featured snippets. What is not at risk, though, is the EEAT components, right? The experience, the authority, the credibility, the trustworthiness, right? Are we sure bone broth has benefits? What was my experience like when I took bone broth for 30 days? Can you trust me? All of these are then what AI is not going to be great at least for now. Who knows what the future holds for us? But that's kind of why I've been on this warpath to teach and educate people on the nuances of what's happening, right? If we target keywords, the problem with targeting keywords is that it's at risk for AI overviews. There is a specific way that, we're testing to optimize for AI overviews, but I strongly believe that we're in a two-model system. AI overviews abide by a very tight consensus models where they're seeking entity-rich passages in very short form content. Another interesting thing from the Google leak was that there was something called, I forget what it was called. It's like short document or short text or something like that. And Google was specifically looking at original content within short text. And I believe that that's because the algorithm that's looking at short texts is looking at, can this be an AI overview? Is this the best answer that we can give? While the rest of the SERP is then going to be focused on this perspective or firsthand experience model, which is why you see user-generated content like Reddit and Quora being boosted dramatically in the SERPs, right? Google's saying, look, this is the stuff that people want. And they're not entirely right, but they're not entirely wrong either. So just a quick example on how to rethink your content moving forward, right? If we think that, okay, AI overviews is essentially, we're all competing for literally like 3 spots in a carousel, and we could even argue that that placement is not good because AI overviews are designed to produce non-action, right? Like the whole goal of an AI overview is for Google to serve the searcher the content so that they don't do an additional action, like click on your website or whatever. So one has to ask oneself, is it even worthwhile to optimize for AI overviews when the goal of the AI overview is no additional action once sees the answer? Okay, so then let's talk about the SERP, right? That's the remaining real estate that we're all trying to fight for. Yeah, if there is an AI overview that answers, how to train for a marathon step by step, you could kind of assume that if your piece of content was like how to train for a marathon step by step, it would be redundant and Google would kind of just throw that off. So that brings us to this idea of a searcher journey, right? If somebody's searching for how to, say, train for a marathon, then it can be things to consider before training for a marathon. How I trained for my first marathon. Can anyone train for a marathon? Should you train for a marathon? Reasons not to train for a marathon. And all of these are different perspectives that somebody is likely to care about for the topic. The problem, though, back to Google, is that nobody's been thinking about SEO content in this particular way, right? Everybody's been abiding by the checklist, best practices, step-by-step, ultimate guide on blah, what is a marathon, so on and so forth. So literally, Google has no pool of content to look at to reinforce this type of content, right? They're like, oh man, I guess let's go to Reddit and Quora and these different hidden gems, if you will, because that's where these things are happening. But I think that over time, as we get smarter in terms of how we're thinking about our content strategy, that Google is going to take that UGC times 1,000 statement in their algorithm and maybe turn it into UGC times 10 or 100, just much less than 1,000, while, right, we rethink how we're approaching our own SEO content. So we're starting to see signs of this occur. And again, I think that Google propaganda is many years ahead of Google execution. But yeah, how to start a keto diet. 7 things I wish I knew before starting a keto diet. How to code. Can anyone learn how to code? How to start a keto diet. Yes, it's Harvard Health, but should you try the keto diet? How to train for a marathon, marathon training plans for every runner. How to train for a marathon again. How to rush marathon training in a short period. How to lower blood pressure without medication. how to do SEO, do it yourself. Most important advice to give a beginner on SEO, right? Essentially, what we're seeing is Google trying its best to surface hidden gems and unique perspectives in this new world of an AI overview that sits on top that answers the consensus answer that people are expecting with EEAT content below. So all of that's to say that, yes, topics are massively in flux all the time. Just think about it from Google's point of view, right? Like I know we all play in Google's like sandbox and that's what we're doing, but what about Google, right? Google is tasked with an impossible task of looking at trillions of documents on the internet and trying to select the best 10 pieces that should match any given topic at any given moment. With the advent of large language models and artificial intelligence, that trillions of documents became infinite pretty much overnight, right? We're flooding the content, or we're flooding the internet with commoditized content at the most extraordinary pace that we've ever seen. So what Google has to do is defend itself against that. And I think what it's doing is that it's looking at information gain and saying, hey, is this topic that you created actually adding to the topic's evolution? And these days we have to be even more guarded on protecting our existing content because topics are changing, infinite content is being produced, and we got to stay on top of topical relevancy. Anyways, the key takeaways is that you got to understand the Google game. I think that this is the slide here, but if you're not ranking, chances are you have technical SEO problems. If you are ranking, but you're not in the top, 30, 20, 30 results on Google, then you're playing the authority game. If you're here in the solid orange line, then you're playing the user engagement signal game. And so essentially understand that there are different phases of the SEO life cycle that you're playing in. And if you're not ranking, yeah, you need to build more links. But if you're on, page 1 and you're just currently position 5, then building more links is likely not going to help you as much. I say likely because obviously links are still very important. And for certain topics, literally the only thing that you can differentiate on is links. But yes, understand which part of the Google game you're playing. Create engaging and original content, right, which is focused on the perspectives that people are likely to care about. Content must contribute information gain, which is a very nuanced way of saying what Google is expecting the topic to evolve into. And perspectives are much more engaging than keywords. Also, this is what I was kind of talking about earlier, but the cannibalization of Google searches is nothing new, right? Obviously, Google bought YouTube, brilliant play, a long time ago. But we no longer just start our searches on Google. We start our searches in different ecosystems, depending on what what we care about. So yeah, lots of how-tos and like leisure searches start on YouTube. Lots of e-commerce searches start on Amazon, and lots of searches don't even happen anymore because we have apps and things that just tell us what the weather is and what the stocks are and whatever. So Google search has survived the cannibalization of many different types of queries. And I leave you with this to say that I think large language models are the biggest existential threat to Google because of this, right? And we're going to see the largest cannibalization of query classes happen or happening. And this is why Google, I think, is very scared and very volatile right now, because they're like, oh man, this is huge, this is big, right? If nobody searches for all of these things anymore, what do we got to do to stay relevant in people's minds? I double checked this with a bunch of influencers in the space. Shout out to Bill Slosky, who was the one who first popularized the concept of information gain. And yeah, we'll open it up for questions. I know we only have like 7 more minutes.
Bernard, that was fascinating. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have one quick question before we go to the questions in the Q&A. I think most of us have gotten used to optimization tools as something that scores how well content is written to keywords. Is there a way, or is it even ClearScope, that we can objectively quantify how well we are optimized for information gain?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. And so I think ClearScope bridges a gap where it tells you knowledge graph coverage, but it doesn't quite tell you information gain. It does a little bit, but not, yeah, not like a, oh my God, there's a whole missing segment on, X, and, you're missing a whole topical evolution in category Y. So yeah, I mean, content optimization platforms like ClearScope were popularized because of the knowledge graph check that Google does, and we have 100% confirmed that. And that's like saying that in a traditional SEO like world, thinking about keyword difficulty, that's like saying, okay, you've built enough authority from a topical perspective to qualify for ranking in the for the query, right? In the same way that you'd have to build enough domain authority by building links to qualify to rank for certain topics that you want to rank for. So content optimization traditionally has been focused on giving Google confidence that you have the baseline amount of comprehension in the content to qualify for ranking. And I think that, the new endeavor then is to say, okay, but what do I got to do to add to this particular topic? And well, you can imagine that that's like a very infinitely complex question. And I don't have a great answer for you because it just literally depends on the topic. Certain topics aren't going to have information gain because they're static. So yeah, anyways, it's a tough question. And that is why Google's just been saying, yeah, your firsthand experience, authority, trustworthiness, right? It's kind of hand wavy, but that's all that they can do because literally the technical answer is it depends on their engagement signal and topical drift, and that is infinitely complex.
Thank you. I'll get to some of the audience questions here. First comes from Dev. We currently use Surfer SEO and have not used ClearScope before. Does the ClearScope tool provide suggestions, recommendations on potential areas for information gain in the content we're currently working on?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is content optimization tools are currently knowledge graph checks. And information gain is, again, infinitely complex. It is something that we are thinking about and working on. But I think that, this is where ideas like people also ask, right? It's like, mining related searches, these are all areas that from a implementation standpoint that we all sort of abide by, and those are interesting possibilities. But yeah, I think I'm still basically trying to figure out how from a technical perspective Google actually defines information gain, because I think that it's very nuanced.
I agree. Another question from Dev, regarding information gain. If I'm a small publisher and spend money and energy on producing original research and presenting it, what is the kind of Google guarantee that I would be treated as the original source for this new research?
Yeah, the sad answer to your question is that there is none. The cycle of what happens is that, and this is actually best shown through the SparkToro and iPullRank Google Docs leak. They leaked it first. They had the original information gain for the topic, and literally within a week, the search engine lands and major publications start to cover it. And where's SparkToro and iPullRank? They're on like the second page. I don't know if that still holds true, but that's this virtuous cycle of you spend a ton of energy and effort producing original, unique, engaging content to add to a topic. You rock it up in the SERPs. Then major publishers use content optimization platforms to understand where the knowledge graph has evolved, thus optimizing their existing content to mirror and match the information gain that you just contributed to the topic. And because they have more authority from a topical and domain perspective, they then replace you in the SERPs. I'm sorry, but that's just the current way that the ecosystem is working. And it's kind of sad to see. But yeah, that's it.
All right. Benj asks, speaking of user engagement, what do you believe Google is tracking in user engagement? Are we mainly talking about CTR in the SERPs and less bounce back to the SERPs? Is there anything that could be measuring, and if it is even capable of measuring?
Yeah.
Do you have any suspicion that Google is looking into Google Analytics data or Google Chrome data?
I mean, Google Chrome, yes, I think that was proven by the Google leaks or something. But they use all of that as baseline anonymized data. I think that ultimately what Google wants to see is that uh, a user is a legitimate signed in Google user. And we all have Gmail accounts and Google accounts. So Google knows that. So if they see an incognito or a rise of traffic because you did Mechanical Turk and you hired a bunch of people and they were all over the world or whatever, Google's going to discount all of that because they know that user engagement is the gold. So you have to be legitimately logged in, verified, have an aged Google account, and then you qualify to train the model. From there, they have anonymized baselines on, I think, different industries. I don't know if it, because, when you set up Google Analytics, it's like, what industry are you in, right? I don't think it goes deeper than industry, right? I think that Google says, okay, this is something in the technology space. This is something in the health space. And on average, I expect user engagement metrics to be X because you're in that industry. So I think that all of that is happening. And then I think that it ultimately, yeah, bounce rate, dwell time, pogo sticking, whatever. I think that these are all leading indicators, but the ultimate indicator is that Google sends a user to a website and then a legitimate logged in user, and then they don't see them again. And then Google says, huh, okay, that must be good, right? That's it. I think ultimately, did somebody complete your searcher journey when they visited your article? I think that different article content experience, whatever, I think that different classes of queries are going to look differently shaped, right? If it's more of a research, this is why there's like these, intent categories. But if it's more of a research-based query, then yeah, I think Google is going to expect a lot more pogo sticking, right, as somebody conducts their research, in which case things like average time on page and dwell time and those kinds of things, I think, start to matter. But ultimately, right, if there is a research query and then Google sends somebody to position number 2, and there are a large percentage of people who go there don't come back, you bet that position 2 is going to become position 1.
I want to be respectful of your time, Bernard. We are at 3 o'clock Eastern. We have a few more questions. Do you have a couple of minutes?
I do. Yes.
Excellent.
Happy to get them answered.
Robert asks, how can the average website help protect its unique content from AI crawlers?
Mm. Yes, that's a good question. I'll answer the how, which is I think you can give robots directives that just say, like, if you're OpenAI or, Anthropic or whatever, don't crawl me. I think, the broader question is, why? Why would you do that? And I think that, it's I personally wouldn't recommend it. That's just my own 2 cents. I think that, it's basically like the early days of AI. And, you could think about it like the early days of search, right? If you were uh, on GeoCities or Zynga, if you remember the early days of the internet. And, Zynga or a blogsmith or something was like, or a blogger was like, hey, do you want to block Google? You probably would have said maybe at the time like, oh, I don't want my content indexed, like this is my own personal content. Yeah, everybody who blocked Google is probably kicking themselves in the butt. So it's like AI's, I think, going to be here and it's going to stay. And I think that you want your data to be training the artificial intelligence models as early as possible, so that you build credibility and trust with however embeddings and AI like data like ends up shaping out.
Dev asks, what is the role of traditional PR, digital PR, and old school branding for new businesses in ranking for SEO?
That's a great question. I think I actually have another thing here with Moz Cod extra slides. Mm, this. Yeah, so branded searches teach Google that you're relevant for a high level topic. And what I mean by this is that let's take Credit Karma, for example. Credit Karma, when you hear that, you think credit score, right? So essentially, how you rank for credit score and these high level like topics is not at all grounded in knowledge graph, like entities, information gain. It literally doesn't matter. Again, right? Like there's all these different permutations of searches. So theoretically speaking, like let's pretend that I am starting an e-commerce site and I want to sell backpacks. Call them bernardsbackpacks.com. So how do I rank for backpacks? It's a good question. How I rank for backpacks is that I convince a non-trivial amount of people who are searching for backpacks that my brand, Bernard's Backpacks, is so relevant to their search that when Google serves 10 results that does not contain Bernard's Backpacks, somebody has to go back to Google and perform an additional search that says backpacks by Bernard. Like literally, that's the path, right? Somebody searched backpacks, they're like, what? I wanted to find Bernard's backpacks. And then they went back and then had to perform an additional search. That is actually how you rank for brand like high level branded topics like vacuum cleaners or backpacks. It's a navigational search that the user is training the model on. And let's say there's 100,000 searches that are happening every month for backpacks. I probably need maybe like something like 2,000 or 3,000 of those 100,000, right? 2 to 3% to literally reperform an additional search for backpacks or Bernard's backpacks if they didn't find backpacks. So this is the role that PR plays in high level topics is that, and this is kind of why you hear in certain cases, these are like people who are very much so testing the boundaries of SEO, but they'll be like, oh, go to Google and search blah, like on their radio ad or something like that. The reasoning is because you want to train legitimate users to correlate your brand with a high level topic. And the fact that when they do a search that doesn't have your brand in it, you're basically training Google's model to say that that's a bad search. And you need to influence enough people to do that to then, make your brand show for really high level topics.
You hear more and more that brand search is the new backlink.
Brand
Uh,
search is certainly the new backlink, but it's because it's right? If you're thinking about Google, like let's put ourselves in Google Webmaster, it's hard. You can't fake it, right? Like you can fake backlink. Like that's what we've been doing as SEO people for the last 20 years. But you cannot fake branded search. It's yeah.
All our backlinks are organically earned. Nothing fake about them.
Yes. Google,
Um,
don't nothing fake about it. Don't
yeah.
don't come after me.
Robert asks, what should we investigate first when our domain has suffered a sudden drop in DA?
Sudden drop in domain authority. I'm assuming you're referring to like a SEMrush or an Ahrefs. Honestly, I, I don't think that that's the right way to think about it, right? If your domain authority has dropped significantly, Ahrefs and SEMrush are simply just giving you proxies for how many links are like pointing at your site. I would say if your traffic has dropped dramatically, then I would be checking my web, search console to see if there's any manual actions. I'd be checking the search status dashboard to see if there is any recent like algorithm updates, like the June or something like that. So yeah, this is where I would be like, okay, like did something happen here? I would be, checking my content management system to see if I had any like injections of malicious code. But yeah, a drop in domain authority, like, well, I think it's pretty much if your traffic is fine, then maybe Ahrefs or SEMrush like screwed up their crawling or something like that. And I wouldn't worry about it.
Right, well, I think that's all we have for today. Bernard, I want to thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed your presentation. Honestly, like I told you earlier, I was a last minute replacement as host, and I figured, oh, information gain. I don't think I'm going to learn anything new here today. And sure enough, I learned a lot new. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us and our audience. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining. I believe a link will be going out shortly with a copy of this video so that you can watch it again or share it with your teams. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Yeah.